Aerial footage is quickly becoming more and more accessible with the cost of new drones dropping almost daily. This results in a lot of aerial footage being posted online. However, there's still an aspect of aerial footage that's often ignored, and that is post-production. With the right post-production techniques applied to your aerial footage, you can take your shots from good to great. Hi, my name is Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus, and throughout this course you're going to learn key post-production techniques that you can apply to your aerial footage. These techniques will not only help give your footage a more cinematic appearance, but they'll help your footage stand out from the surplus of aerial footage that's posted online. In this course, you're going to learn a wide range of topics, everything from proper camera settings and how to reduce Jello effects on your aerial footage, to slow motion effects and color grading, and even how to do some basic 3D tracking on your footage. Throughout this course, I'm going to be doing my post-production work in After Effects. However, if you only have Premiere Pro or another editing program, you will still see benefits from the insights covered throughout this course. Also, anyone who takes this course is going to have access to some great project files that are going to help you follow along. The project files include aerial clips, PDF guide sheets, custom color grading LUTs, and more. Make sure you check out the next lesson where you're going to learn the best settings for your aerial camera and how to avoid common problems with aerial footage. In this lesson, we will learn about the best settings for your aerial camera and how you can avoid common problems with aerial footage. The settings on your aerial camera are easy to overlook, however they play a huge factor in determining how good your aerial footage is going to look in the end. Think about it this way, no matter how great the flight and the scenery is, if your aerial camera settings aren't set up properly, the footage will look subpar. Think of your camera settings as your foundation. If they are not set up properly for each shoot, the entire aerial production will be affected. I'm going to be covering a lot of camera settings inside of the DJI Pilot app. However, these camera settings are pretty universal. So even if you're not using the DJI Pilot app or using another camera setup, these setting recommendations are the same regardless of camera or brand. The first setting you're going to want to adjust, and it's probably the most important in my opinion, is the picture profile. This may also be listed under color profile, style, etc. For this setting, you're going to want to select the flattest profile possible, which is likely listed under the name flat. Or you can manually adjust the settings to be flat. Filming in a flat, low contrast picture profile is going to prevent the highlights from blowing out and the darks from being too dark. It's also going to give you the most dynamic range for grading and post-production. While you're recording in a flat profile, the image will often look washed out with low saturation and contrast. This is normal, again to give you the most leeway in post-production. If your camera doesn't have a flat picture profile option, cameras often have a custom option that you can set to be flat. This is what DJI users will have to do. Under the custom style options, set the sharpness to -1, the contrast setting to -2, and the saturation setting to -2. Feel free to play and tweak with these settings to best fit your visual style. Some cameras may also offer a color option along with a style option. This is for artistic purposes such as filters, etc. If your camera has this option, it's a good idea to set it to none or to log if your camera has that option. Log color options will pull the most color information from your camera's sensor, again giving you more leeway when color grading in post. Your white balance option will depend on when and what you are shooting, but typically you'll be shooting in the daylight or cloudy white balance modes. I highly recommend never using the auto white balance function because this can change your white balance between shots, and this can be a nightmare to try to match and color correct in post-production. Now let's take a look at ISO. ISO may also be referred to as gain on your camera, and this can help bring up the exposure of your image when you're filming in a dark location. However, this introduces more image noise the higher you go, and since most drone camera sensors are small, this noise can quickly turn your image into a mushy mess, degrading nearly everything about the image. My personal recommendation is set your ISO as low as it will go and leave it there. And if you need to brighten up your image, just lower your shutter speed to bring up the exposure. And only increase your ISO knowing that the picture quality will suffer. Shutter speed is a very important and powerful aspect of aerial footage. Shutter speed can make your footage look tack sharp, blurry, or even strobe. All of these may or may not be desired results, so it's a good idea to understand them. Shutter speed is often confused with frame rate. Whereas frame rate is how many frames per second your video captures, shutter speed is how quick each one of those frames is captured. This is important when it comes to drone footage. Just as a reference example, here's a picture I took with a DSLR while I was spinning. This is at 1/30th of a second shutter speed. And this is at 1/1000th of a second shutter speed. Each are just one frame but give quite different results. And now you may be thinking, okay, I'll just use a higher shutter speed. But this can lead to another side effect called strobing. Because there's less motion blur on the image, frames tend to jump or strobe instead of flowing smoothly. This is common when you're flying closer to the ground or to trees since they are moving past the camera at a faster rate than the terrain in the distance. Here's an example of a shot with a lower shutter speed. And here's one with a higher shutter speed. You can use higher shutter speeds when you're higher up in the air. I try to find a nice medium, and I usually use the shutter speed around 1/120th of a second. This gives me a good sharpness on my image and doesn't strobe too much. However, if I'm going to be flying closer to objects such as treetops, I'll lower my shutter speed to prevent strobing. I also lower my shutter speed when I'm flying in the evening when it's a little bit darker and I need to brighten up the image. You can also increase your shutter speed to darken an image if you're filming on a really sunny day and the image is getting blown out. However, a better solution for this may be to use an ND filter like this one that comes with the DJI Inspire 1. This will cut down the light entering the camera, allowing you to use a lower, more manageable shutter speed and prevent the image from being overexposed. For video resolution, I would select the largest size you can for the frame rate that you want. Even if you're going to be outputting your video at a smaller resolution, the higher resolution you record in generally will result in more detail in the image when you downscale the video for your final output. An example of this will be filming in 4K or 2K and then in the editing process, editing at 1080p, which will require you to scale down your footage to fit. Doing this results in a sharper image than if you just filmed at 1080p resolution with your drone. Filming at a high resolution like 4K will also give you the flexibility to crop in on your image in post and not lose much resolution. You can also do this with 1080p footage if you're going to be outputting at a 720p resolution. The only times when you should be forced to film at a lower resolution is when you're filming at a higher frame rate, such as 60 frames per second, which can then be converted in post to 30 or 24 frames per second, giving you smoother slow motion effects on your footage. Hopefully you found these camera recommendation settings useful. I'm also going to include a PDF download for this lesson in the project files that shows the exact camera settings I use in my DJI camera and my GoPro Hero 4 camera, so you can use them or compare them with your own. In the next lesson, we're going to examine a few preparation practices that may need to be done to your drone in order to prevent the rolling shutter effect, also known as the Jello effect, from occurring on your aerial footage. In this lesson, we're going to learn a few preparation practices that are going to help us to prevent Jello effects from occurring on our aerial footage. Rolling shutter effects, which are often referred to as Jello effects with aerial footage, are probably the most common problem with UAV pilots when it comes to capturing great aerial video. Nothing says amateur drone footage like a bunch of squiggly motion occurring all over the video. The reason this occurs on the footage is because of how the camera's sensor reads each frame. It captures each frame in a method called rolling shutter, effectively capturing each frame in a series of lines from the top to the bottom. This happens almost instantly and for the most part is unnoticeable. However, when the camera is dealing with quick, high-frequency movements, such as a vibration from the drone's props, this can offset the camera very slightly, which can result in micro warps on each frame as the sensor scans the image from the top to the bottom. These warps give the footage a jello-like movement, which can be very distracting to the viewer. Luckily, there's a few steps we can take to prevent this problem. It's a common misconception that people think that you can remove the jello effects from your video in post-production. They really can't, and trying to remove them in post-production should be a last resort. We'll look at some ways you can try to reduce them in post in the next lesson. However, these methods are not optimal. The very best way to reduce jello effects is preparation before the flight of the UAV. The first thing that needs to be noticed is that rolling shutter and jello warping are a common problem with most smaller style action cameras, such as GoPros. So this isn't just a result of aerial footage. Any quick jarring of an action type camera will typically result in rolling shutter jello effects. So it is crucial for the camera to remain steady. The best solution for this is a 3-axis gimbal built onto the drone, such as the H3 3D gimbal that's often coupled with the DJI Phantom 2 or any drone with a 3-axis camera balance system. If your drone doesn't have 3-axis stabilization on your camera, you're almost guaranteed to get jello effects on your aerial footage. Next, you're going to need to ensure that your props are all equally balanced. If your props are not all equally balanced, what this can do is result in high-frequency vibrations sent from the drone to your camera, which are going to cause jello effects. You can check to see if your drone's props are balanced using a prop balance rod, which typically costs around $15. After you've attached your prop to the rod, you'll need to check and make sure that you have a level surface to test on. Next, you're going to need something low friction to place the balance rod on. A food can or a glass typically work fine. Then check to see if one side of the prop leans downward. If it stays level, then your prop is well balanced. If one side falls downward, then that side of the prop is heavier. To compensate for this, you can rub fine-grained sandpaper on the heavier side of the prop. A little goes a long way with this, so make sure you don't overdo it. I only use the sandpaper enough to get the prop balanced and also check to make sure there are no cracks in the prop. Filming at a higher resolution will also result in less Jello effects, so again, remember to always film in the highest resolution possible. An ND filter can also reduce Jello effects because it's going to reduce the shutter speed of your camera. Typically, a lower shutter speed will result in less Jello effects because of the high frequency vibrations. The wind and the weather are also going to play a huge factor. Although most drones are ready to fly in winds upwards of 25 miles per hour, typically flying in any winds over 5 to 10 miles per hour are going to increase your likelihood of having Jello effects on your footage. You might even notice that flying with a constant wind won't be a problem, but the problems start to occur with lots of gusting wind. Finally, your flight speed is going to play a huge factor. I was a little gun shy before purchasing my first drone because I saw all the Jello effects on everyone else's aerial footage. But then I quickly realized that this is because a lot of people race their drones around instead of actually focusing on the cinematography of the shot. It's not a race to get the shot the fastest, and the faster you go, the more vibration is going to be sent through your drone because of the air turbulence. Fly at a slow, steady rate and always fly through your shot. Don't just quickly halt the drone. One last thing I'll mention is you may want to invest in a lens hood for your aerial camera. These can help prevent sun strobing from occurring on your footage, which is a result of the sun passing through the prop blades, which can create some unnatural flickering effects on your footage. Hopefully these tips will help to prevent any Jello effects from occurring on your aerial footage. From here on out, we're going to be working in After Effects, learning about several post-production techniques that are going to help us to get the most out of our aerial footage. In the next lesson, we're going to examine some different ways we can try to reduce Jello effects in post-production. All right, now we're working in After Effects, and I'm going to show you guys some different techniques you can use to try and reduce the Jello effects in post. Now, I emphasize try, because you're going to find this is a very case-by-case basis kind of thing where on some clips this will be effective and others it won't. It's a common misconception to think that just because these removal effects exist that they're going to be 100% effective, and I can assure you they will not be. But in some cases you don't have a choice where you've got a shot and it's got warps on it and you need to remove them or at least reduce them. I'm going to show you guys now some different ways you can do that to hopefully make your footage at least passable. There's a few different ways we can go about doing this in After Effects, so let's get to it. Alright, so the clip I'm going to be working with today is a snow scene that I filmed using my drone, and this clip is going to be included in the project file so you can download it and follow along with this lesson. You can see that we're looking down on snowy terrain here with some bare trees. I'm going to go ahead and do a RAM preview of this just so we can see where the rolling shutter is occurring. So I'm going to hit 0 on the keyboard, and that'll run through. And I'm going to skip ahead here to where that's done RAM previewing. Alright, so now we can see a sample of the clip here, and we can see a little bit of the rolling shutter artifacts going on. This may be very difficult to see with the compression of this tutorial. Basically up here on this top left-hand side, we will be able to see a little bit of Jello warping going on. I'm going to RAM preview that again. You can see just a little bit of shutter shaking going on right here. I'm going to blow this up too so you can see this, just so you can hopefully see the distortion on this tutorial. The warping is very subtle, but we're going to try to remove that here in this example. So I'm going to take this example clip, I'm going to drag it down and create a new composition right here. And because this clip is filmed in 4K, it's created a 4K composition, and I actually just want a 1080p composition because that's what I typically export to. So I'm going to right click, composition settings, I'm going to change the width to 1920, and that'll automatically change the height to 1080. If it doesn't, you can just type in 1080. And I'm going to name this composition scene. And I'm going to click OK. And now we can see our composition is 1920 by 1080, and our footage is still 4K, so it's much larger than our composition. And this is actually the first step you can do to try to reduce Jello effects. Because the Jello effects are very subtle, just by downscaling your footage from 4K to 1080p, it's basically going to compress those pixels and effectively reduce the distortion. The distortion's still going to be there. You're still going to have the Jello effects, but they're going to be a little more subtle than they were when you're viewing it at the full resolution in 4K. So what we can do to do this, click on your clip, go up here to Layer, Transform, and Fit to Comp Height. You may be tempted to click Fit to Comp, but in some cases your footage may be actually wider than 1920 by 1080, and this will actually scale your footage a little bit skewed. So it's better to click Fit to Comp Height. That way if your clip was filmed at a wider aspect ratio, it won't get squished effectively when it gets resized. Okay, now let's do another RAM preview of this just to see what the reduction looks like so far. So I'm just going to click here, I'm going to hit 0 on the numeric keypad to do a RAM preview. Alright, so now we can see the preview here. We're viewing this at 50%, and you can still see some of the subtle shaking going on there. But again, because this is now at 1080p, that's going to be a little bit reduced as opposed to what it was at 4K. But now let's move forward and look at a way where we can hopefully counter the actual Jello effects occurring on the footage. And the first way I recommend doing that is the rolling shutter effect. So I'm gonna go up here to the window and I'm gonna click on to view the effects panel. And I'm just gonna type in rolling shutter. Actually, there it already pops up by just typing in roll. I'm gonna drag this and place this on the example clip. I'm gonna close the effects and presets panel for the time being just so we can have more room to see here. In my opinion, the rolling shutter repair is going to be the best effect you can use to effectively remove the Jello from your footage. It's my first choice when I'm trying to remove Jello effects. This may or may not work for you, but we're going to find out on this clip here. And what this is going to do is basically look at the footage frame by frame and kind of analyze what it determines is the rolling shutter when it gets offset, throughout the clip. And so I typically leave these at pretty much the standard settings. It's going to have a rolling shutter rate of 50%. The scan direction is going to be from top to bottom. That's what it is in this case on this GoPro footage. And most action camera footage, it analyzes the top first and goes down to the bottom. Now for method, we have two choices. We have warp and pixel motion. And depending on how much time you have for your render, may depend on which choice you choose. Warp is generally going to be a little bit faster, but it's not going to correct it quite as much. I've had more luck using pixel motion. Now this is going to slow down your render time quite a bit. You can see that it took a little bit longer time just to load this one frame. If I just jump around here, you can see that it takes quite a bit longer just to render one frame. So if you have a lot of time and you want to test this out, definitely try this. Again, this is going to be a very render heavy effect, so this may be something you just want to try on a little sample of your footage first before you render out your entire clip, because it will take a long time to render. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on my clip here. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard and just click down a little bit further. Hit N, just to make my work area a little bit smaller, my composition here. Now I'm going to hit 0 to RAM preview this. Now, this will take quite a long time, so I'm going to speed this part up. So if you are following along with this lesson in After Effects, just be prepared. This is probably going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to RAM preview just this little section. So I'm going to hit 0 on the numeric keypad. I'm going to let this run through, and I'll be back when this finishes. All right, now that the RAM preview is finished, we can go ahead and preview it here. And we can see in the top left corner here, the rolling shutter appears to be very much reduced. I can still see a few little instances of it, but it looks a lot better than it did. And so in this case, the solution is working pretty effectively. I'm going to zoom in here just so we can RAM preview this a little bit closer. So we can still see a few warps here or there, but in effect, it's looking a lot better than it did. So I would say in this case that this worked for us using the rolling shutter repair with the pixel motion. However, there's another method you might try, and I'm going to show you that now. I'm going to delete the rolling shutter repair effect. Now I'm going to bring up the tracker panel. Under Window, I'm going to go to Tracker. The other solution is using the Warp Stabilizer effect. So I'm going to select my footage, and I'm going to click Warp Stabilizer. Now it's automatically going to start analyzing your footage. We don't want it to do that yet, so I'm going to click Cancel over here. And Warp Stabilizer is a popular effect to try to reduce the rolling shutter. It's actually better at stabilizing the camera, which a lot of times we get rolling shutter because the camera isn't stable. However, in our instance, the Jello effect on our footage is so prevalent that the Warp Stabilizer is likely not going to recognize it as a camera shake. It's just going to think that it's actually part of the footage. It's still worth trying depending on your shot, so I'll go ahead and show you this now. What you'll do under Warp Stabilizer effect, under Stabilization, leave that at smooth motion. And for smoothness, you can go ahead and leave that around 50%. For method, you're going to want to make sure this is on subspace warp. That's what it is natively, but this subspace warp is effectively going to warp and distort the footage to basically counteract any rolling shutter. On the framing, you're going to go ahead and leave that at Stabilize, Crop, and Auto Scale. And what we need to do now is tab down the Advanced Settings and check on Detailed Analysis. Now again, After Effects, when you check this, is automatically going to start analyzing the footage. We don't want it to do that, so you're going to need to click Cancel again. Okay, the other option under the Advanced Settings we want to take a look at is the Rolling Shutter Ripple. Now it's going to be default set to Automatic Reduction. We're going to want to change this to Enhanced Reduction. And for the crop less and smooth more, I like to set this around 10 to 20%. In this case, I'm going to set it at 12. Because basically, we don't want to crop in too much on our shot because that's not what we're looking to do. We're looking more to remove the rolling shutter effect on the footage. All right, and that's pretty much all we need to set up on this. So after we've set that up, go ahead and click Analyze. I'm going to let this analyze, and I'll skip ahead when this is finished. Okay, now the analysis is finished. It took about 9 minutes, so you can tell it's quite a lengthy process. And unfortunately, now that I'm looking at this, after this is completed, I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see this a little bit clearer. I can still see quite a few Jello effects going on here on the footage. So in this case, the Warp Stabilizer did not work at all. And actually, I would almost argue that it made it worse. So you can see it's a very case-by-case basis when you're using these effects. I do think the Rolling Shutter Repair works quite a bit better than the Warp Stabilizer. But then again, you do want to check out both just in case it works better for your shot. Hopefully the 3 methods we went over in this lesson will help you out to reduce any rolling shutter effects you do have in your footage. Reducing jello effects on our footage is probably not the most exciting thing in the world to do, but it's something we definitely need to tackle first. In the next lesson, we're going to look at how you can remove fisheye distortion from your aerial footage. Alright, in this lesson we're going to look at lens distortion removal. This is commonly associated with GoPro cameras where you have the really widescreen, almost fisheye looking footage that kind of distorts around the edges. So we're going to look at how we can remove that. In this lesson, I'm going to be using example clip 2 that's included with the project file. So I'm going to click on that clip and just drag it down here to create a new composition. This clip is also 4K, so I'm going to right click, go to composition settings. I'm going to change this to 1920 by 1080. And I'm going to name the composition GoPro Fix. And I'm going to click OK. Alright, now we can see our footage is much bigger than our composition, so I'm going to select the footage. I'm going to go up here to Layer, Transform, Fit to Comp Height. Alright, so that's going to scale our footage down to fit perfectly in the 1080p composition. I'm going to close this tracker window here just so we have a little bit more room. And here's a very common example of the distortion that a GoPro gives the footage. So this is just an aerial clip flying forward over some scenic terrain. And we can see how the fisheye basically gives the earth kind of a round appearance. And this distortion effect can be very distracting if it's not like an action style video. And what we really want is for our footage to look more cinematic. Luckily for us, this is a really easy fix. I'm going to go up here to Effect. I'm going to go to Distort. And the effect Optics Compensation. Before I dive into the settings of this effect, I want to explain a little bit of what it's going to be doing and why it's better to always use a 4K shot when using this effect. It's effectively going to be stretching and scaling the pixels around the edges to basically remove this lens distortion. But since we're working with a 4K shot that's not pre-composed, it's just scaled down to this 1080p composition, we've effectively got more pixel density to work with. So we're going to get a higher quality result because we're using a 4K shot. Now, the first option we have here is field of view, and I'll just pull this up a little bit so we can see what this is doing. And right off the bat, you're going to notice that this is not working the way we need it to work. And you're going to want to check on this checkbox here, Reverse Lens Distortion. And now we can see what this effect is doing a lot more. So if I pull this up here, the higher I pull it, you can see the horizon line starts to level out, and that's what we want. We basically want this to be perfectly level. And I recommend anywhere between 70 and 75 is what I found for a GoPro that tends to work the best when shooting in the wide lens angle. So I'm just going to type in 75 here. And I think that looks pretty good here. We can see the horizon looks pretty level. We're not getting very much distortion. I'm going to check the effect on and off here just so you can see what's happening around the edges. You can see how it's basically pulling the pixels to straighten everything out. Now, one thing you might notice is the horizon looks straight, but it's not quite level. And this is very common with aerial footage. It's a very easy fix as well. A lot of times the gimbal will get off by a degree or two. So your shot is everything is effectively rotated about 1 degree. So what we can do here, I'm going to click on the clip. I'm just going to hit R on the keyboard, bring up rotation. Basically, I can rotate this, I think about -1 degree there. That's looking a lot straighter. You can check this by clicking on the rulers. And if you click up here, you can pull down on this little red bar, and that's going to show you basically a level line. So we can just kind of preview that, and that horizon looks pretty level there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the rulers and the guides. That way we can just see this a little clearer. Close the info box here. All right, now another thing you'll notice here is we now have this black in the top corners and kind of around the edges. It's because we rotated it, so we need to scale this up just a touch. So I'm going to hit S on the keyboard while I have the clip selected. And I'm going to, instead of having it at 50%, I'm going to set it at 52%. And there we go, it's just enough so we're not getting anything cut off here. And our terrain looks perfectly level. And now our shot, the lens distortion is gone. So this already looks really good. It's going to be a lot more cinematic. Now, one thing this does do is it kind of crops in on the shot. So if we want to get the entire wide angle of the shot without having the lens distortion, we can check this checkbox over here, which is Optimize Pixels. And now we can see we have a much wider shot all the way through from each side of the frame. Looks a lot closer to our original shot here. I'm just going to turn the effect on and off just so you can see this. So now we're really seeing the full width of the shot and everything's just been straightened up. But now notice we have these black areas at the top and the bottom. That's because it's basically bending the image, but now we have these areas at the top and bottom that need to be filled in. And the easiest way to get rid of this is just to add some aspect ratio bars at the top and bottom of the footage, like a 2:3:5 aspect ratio. I've included a 2:3:5 image overlay in the project files, and I'm going to grab that and overlay that now. So I'll just grab this aspect ratio overlay, put it over my footage here, and it's formatted for a 1080p composition. Now you can see this covers up the top and the bottom. We're getting a very widescreen appearance on our shot. We can scroll through here. Let's drag this down so we can see. I'll do a quick RAM preview of this just so we can see what it looks like. Alright, so now we can see this shot has the lens distortion completely removed. Looks much more cinematic. We're getting a very wide angle shot, but again, we don't have that distortion. I'm going to show you what this looks like again before and after the effect here. There's after and there's before. We can't even see the top horizon line here because of our aspect ratio markers, but that just shows you how distorted the shot actually was and what we can bring it back to after we do the lens distortion removal. In the next lesson, we're going to look at some basic color correction techniques for aerial footage. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to do some basic color correction on our aerial footage that's been filmed in a flat picture profile. I'm going to be working with example clip 3 from the project files. We can see we've got a cool landscape shot here that was filmed on an overcast day with a storm coming up. You can see it's very low contrast. We have a lot of dynamic range here, but there's just not a lot of contrast and there's not a lot of saturation in the image. So what I want to do is basically color correct this back to the way it looked when it was shot. So the first thing I want to do is add a levels effect to this footage. So I'm going to go up to the window, select the effects and presets panel here, and I'm going to type in levels. It's under the color correction effects. I'm just going to drag this over to my clip. I'm going to move this over so we can see everything here. Now sometimes when you apply the levels effect, you won't see any histogram information right here. What you can do is just grab this end arrow, move it over a little bit, and your histogram should show up. So I'm going to pull that back over. All right, what we can see on our histogram here is we have a lot of information right here in the middle. We really don't have any information in the dark black area or the bright white area here. So what we need to do is tell the levels effect where our blacks and our whites are, basically where the brightest white is and where the darkest blacks are. So we can do this by pulling up the input black tab here on the end. I'm just going to pull this up right around the fall off area on the back end of the histogram. Now what you don't want to do is actually clip the blacks and bring the black tab up too far here. So when I do this, you can see the image gets very crushed and the blacks just get completely dark. We're losing a lot of detail information here and the colors just don't look very good. So what I like to do is actually move the input black a little bit after the fall off of the blacks here on the end of the histogram. That way it doesn't crush any of the color information there. I can look here and see where the darks are. We're getting a little bit of a dark spot here, so let me pull this back just a little bit further. Now we can do the same thing with the input white here. I'm going to pull this down right about there. And now we can already see we already have a lot more contrast on our image. The image looks a lot brighter. We have some good vibrant colors going on, and we can see actually details that we couldn't see before up here in the clouds. We can see a lot of contrast detail right here in the center of the storm. It's looking very good. We're getting some good greens and blues here. Now if you wanted to, you could almost stop your basic color correction right here because we have contrast, we have saturation, the shot looks a lot better, and we're getting that dynamic range because we filmed in a flat picture profile. However, we're going to take this a little bit further, and the next step I like to do to my footage is add a vibrance effect. So I'm going to go up to the effects and presets here, I'm going to type in vibrance. I'm going to pull this effect over and put it to my clip. Now I like using the vibrance effect a lot more than the saturation effect because saturation tends to bring up all the colors at once. And I'll show you an example of this because with the vibrance effect, you actually have access to vibrance and saturation. So I'm just going to pull the saturation up to about 40. And you can see we get this very hyper real look where all the colors get brought up an equal percentage, and it just doesn't look very appealing here because we have this red spot that's blowing out, the blues just look very unnatural, and you get this what I like to call the nuclear green color here on the greens. It just is not a very natural look, looks very synthetic. So I'm going to take the saturation back down to 0. Vibrance is a much smarter effect. It kind of adds saturation in a more subtle way and adds it more to the greens and blues over other colors. So I'm going to bring this up to 40 again so you can see this. And now we can see this gives a much more richer tone to our image. Looks a lot better, especially for nature aerial shots. And this was a little bit more of an extreme example, so I'm going to dial this back down to about 18 or so just to add a little bit of punch to that image. So this is looking really good. And let's say we notice this really cool looking blue tone here we're getting. But let's say this actually is not the right color blue when we shot this. Let's say it was a little bit more closer to cyan. And let's say these trees are a little bit darker. So we can do a little bit more color matching here. I'm going to add the hue and saturation effect. It's also under the color correction effects. I'm going to drag this to my clip. And what you can do on hue and saturation is you can actually adjust the color tones of specific colored channels. So under channel control here, I'm going to dial down to the blues. And you can actually adjust the hue of the blues to make it a little more cyan. So I'm going to just move this back a little bit. Now you can see how that changed and shifted to cyan colors. And you can move this as far as you want to different color tones. You have to be careful how far you push it though, because you'll start to get a lot of artifacting here. Let's see when I move this to the reds. We're just getting a lot of artifacts. Does not look very good at all. So I'm going to set this on about -10 or so. And that'll change it to a nice cyan colored blue. Now if I zoom in here real close, and this may be very difficult to see in this lesson on the tutorial, but I'm getting a little bit of artifacting in here because of this blue tone. So what I can do is I'm also going to go to the cyan channel, and I'm going to move that back to about -10, just to help these colors blend a little bit. It helps when you shift colors that are kind of near the same spectrum together. That way you get less artifacting going on. Now for our trees, one thing to know, especially when you film on a sunny day, the greens are typically going to fall more on the yellow channel than the green channel. In this case, since we film on an overcast day, it's going to fall kind of 50-50. But just keep that in mind when you're going to adjust the green. So I'm going to click on the yellow channel first. And I'm going to move the hue of the yellows over about 10 degrees or so. So that's giving that a little bit more of a greener vibrancy. You don't want to move this too far. And we can see another problem happening here. If I turn this on and off, we can see that this grass here, which is kind of a lighter color than these trees, it's kind of shifted to too dark a green. It looks a little bit unnatural. So I'll check this on and off. You can see before and after. So you want to use this very sparingly. I'm going to set this back to about 10. And to help this blend a little bit more, I'm also going to shift the greens over about 10 degrees. And now I think our greens are the right color, but I think they're a little too bright. So I'm actually going to pull back the lightness of the greens here, probably to about -30. I'll also do that for the yellows as well, just to help that blend a little better. And there we go. Now we're getting a darker, much more nature-looking green. And we've got our nice blue cyan going on there. So now our color correction is pretty much done. If you want to add a little bit more of a sharpness bite to your footage, if it was filmed in kind of a softer profile, you can add the effect Unsharp Mask. It's under the Blur and Sharpen effects. I'm just going to put this on my footage. And you're going to want to be careful when you use this effect because it can magnify your artifacts here with the sharpening. I'm just going to check this on and off so you can kind of see what's going on here. It can just help to add a little more bite to your image. I like to set the amount on mine to about 20. And there we go. I think we've done a very nice color correction on this shot. I'm going to go ahead and check the effects on and off so we can see a before here. Very low contrast, very unsaturated, but we have a lot of dynamic range. Now we can see it with the effects on. Looks a lot more like it did when we actually shot the shot. One more thing to note here, I've got this little area of clay. This is where there's been some landscaping work done. There's no trees, and that red's kind of standing out like a sore thumb. So I can go back up here to my hue and saturation. I'm going to go to the red channel. I'm just going to dial back the red saturation there until that kind of goes away. There we go, it looks a lot more natural. All right, and that's how you do basic color correction on your aerial footage. In the next lesson, we're going to learn about slow motion, and we're going to learn how to properly interpret footage shot at a higher frame rate in order to gain a true slow motion look. All right, now let's take a look at how we can interpret footage shot at a higher frame rate in order to gain a true slow motion look. This is great for shots that are filmed at 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second, and you want to interpret them down to 24 frames per second so you can get a slow motion look on your shot. So what I've got here, I'm going to be working with example clip 4 from the project files. This clip was shot at 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second. So what I want to do is make this be a 1920 by 1080 composition, but at 24 frames per second. So I'm going to click on the Create Composition button down here. I'm going to name my composition Slow Motion. The width is 1920, height 1080. I'm going to set the frame rate to 24. The duration to about 10 seconds long. I'm going to click OK. All right, now I'm going to bring in my example clip and we can look at what's going on here. Pull this up so we can see it a little bit more. And so our shot was filmed at 60 frames per second. So I'm going to go ahead and do a RAM preview of this so we can see what this looks like. And so right off the bat, we can tell something doesn't look quite right. We can see that the shot, it's smooth, but it's kind of got a little bit of jumping going on. And that's because it was filmed at 60 frames per second, but our composition is at 24 frames per second. So what's happening right now is we're only seeing 24 of the 60 frames per second that were shot. So basically we've got more frames than we're actually seeing. So what we can do here in our project panel, we can right click on our example clip, go down to Interpret Footage, and select Main. That's going to pop up the Interpret Footage options. And under frame rate down here, I'm going to select Conform to Frame Rate. And we can see it's currently set at 60. I'm going to set this to be 24. Click OK. Now we can see in our composition the clip's gotten quite a bit longer, and it actually is getting cut off right here. So I'm actually going to pull this out to be the full length of the clip. And now I'll go ahead and do a RAM preview of this. And now we can see we're getting a full true to slow motion shot. Because what we're doing, we've got the 60 frames per second that we shot, but now we're playing it back at only 24 frames per second. And it's actually doing 1 frame per frame because we interpreted the footage down to 24 frames per second. And as you can see, we're getting the proper slow motion result that we want. It's a very smooth and cinematic slow motion look. And again, you can do this with shots that have been filmed at 48 or 30 frames per second as well. You can also bring those down to 24 frames per second. That'll give a little bit of a subtle slow motion effect to your footage. You can help accent it quite nicely. In the next lesson, we're going to examine how we can add some speed ramping effects to our aerial footage. Alright, in this lesson we're going to learn how we can apply a speed ramp effect to our aerial footage. It's a very popular effect that's often seen on aerial clips. I'm going to be working with example clip 5 from the project files. So I'm going to click on my clip. I'm just going to drag it down here so it creates a new composition. Alright, so what we've got here is a 30-second clip of the drone flying over this road. I'm going to drag this through so we can see. So we have the drone flying through, and then it flies up above the tree line here. So I think it'd be really cool if we had a speed ramp effect on our shot. So it went really fast right up to about right here. Then we see some real-time footage, and then it speeds up again all the way up to about right here, and then goes back to regular speed. This is an easy effect we can do in After Effects, and the first thing we need to do on our example clip, I'm going to click it, I'm going to right-click, and we need to go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. Alright, so what that's going to do is create a keyframe at the very beginning and the end of our clip, and basically everything in between is going to be playing at real time. So what we need to do is go through and add keyframes at certain points where we want instances to occur. So I'm going to move down on my clip here to about right here where I want the first speed ramp to stop. So basically what I want to occur is for the clip to go really fast up to about right here and then go to regular time. So what I want to do is create a keyframe right here by clicking on this little diamond icon. And I want it to play at normal speed to about right here or so, and then I want it to speed up again. So when I want the regular speed portion to end, I need to create another keyframe. Click right here. So I want this to be sped up again. So I want it to be going really fast right here to about right here, right when it gets over that tree. So what I can do is create another keyframe, and I want this to play back in normal time. So now we've created our keyframes, and everything's still playing at the same speed, but if we want to adjust this, what I can do is I want to select all of the keyframes, except for the very first one, and I can pull this down. So basically what this is doing is speeding up everything in between these two initial keyframes. So if I bring this down to about right here so basically that entire 10-second area of footage right in between here is now compressed to about 1 to 2 seconds. So it's going very quick. So let's go ahead and ramp preview this just so you can see what's happening. So we can see it goes really fast at first, and then goes back into regular motion right there, and that's exactly what we want. And then we want this to speed up again. So if we want this to speed up again, what we need to do is take this area in between these two keyframes here. So this is the real-time section here. So I don't really want to move either of these two keyframes separately, so I don't want to drag this one around because that's going to mess up the timing in between there. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. So I basically want to leave the gap between these two keyframes alone if I want that to be the real-time section, which I do. In this area right here, I want it to be sped up, so I need to grab these two keyframes, making sure to not move one by itself, and I'll move both of them at the same time by selecting them both. I'm just going to drag this down to be about right here so. So what we should have here is we have this little area that's sped up, we have a real-time section, speeds up again, and then back to a real-time section. And then at the end of this keyframe, it's just going to stop and hold because that's actually the end of the clip. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to highlight the end of this keyframe here, and I'm going to hit N on the keyboard just to close this workspace area here. Because when we speed up the footage, basically all this section after the last frame is just going to be stuck on the same frame, and we really don't need that. So I'm just going to preview this area here. So I'm going to hit 0 on the numeric keypad again so we can ramp preview this. Now we can already see we're getting a really cool effect. We're getting that initial speed up, some real time right here, going nice and smooth, and then it speeds up again right there over the treetops. And we can push this to even more extreme. So basically I'm going to take this first section here, I'm going to select all the keyframes except for the very first one. I'm going to move this down even closer so it goes really fast right at the beginning. Then I want to close this gap right here. I'm going to grab these last two keyframes, move them a lot closer so it just speeds up a lot. And I'm going to go ahead and ramp preview this again. Alright, that's looking a lot better. Really fast right there at the beginning with this slow drifting motion, then it speeds up again right there over the treetops. Alright, so this looks pretty good. We could almost stop right now if we wanted to, but we can do a couple other things to finesse this so it looks even better. So the first thing I want to do is smooth out these keyframes just a little bit more so I can select all of my keyframes. I can hold Control and click, and that's going to create roaming keyframes. That's going to transition them just a little bit smoother. So I can go ahead and preview this. And there we go. It's just going to help ease in and out from the extreme speeds a little bit easier and just add a little bit more of an overall smoothness to the shot. Now the next thing we can do is add a little bit of motion blur to our shot here. If you notice in this very beginning section, it's almost kind of choppy because it goes so quick. Because basically what we've done is we've taken about 10 seconds of footage and compressed it into about 1 second. So there's a lot of frames that aren't being used, and so we're getting kind of almost like a strobing effect on our footage. We want to get rid of that, and it's really easy to do. So what we can do is on our clip, we can go over here to the frame blending and we can select it once. And that's going to enable frame blending. So what that's going to do is take all those frames that are initially in that first little 10-second area right here, and it's going to basically overlay them all on top of each other. So we kind of get this realistic motion blur effect. Now you only want to click the frame blending once. You don't want to click it twice because that's going to go to pixel motion, and that's not what we want. So if you click it again, it's going to go away, and we click it one more time to turn back on frame blending. And in order to see what this is doing, you need to enable frame blending right here in the composition. So I'm going to click that on, and now we can see what's happening. It's an extreme zoom effect, so we're getting some really cool motion blur on our shot. I'll zoom in here so we can see this a little closer. So basically what you can see is it's overlaying all the different frames on top of each other. We're getting some really cool looking organic motion blur. And this is going to look really cool when we preview this. Now it will take a lot longer to preview when you're doing the frame blending just because it's doing a lot of interpolation with all the frames. But I'll go ahead and ramp preview this and you can see how much better this actually looks. And there you go. You can see we're getting some really cool organic and natural speeding up and slowing down of the footage. It's a really cool speed ramp effect. It works great on aerial footage to really make your shots stand out. Now one thing I noticed is when it goes back to the slow motion effect, the roaming keyframes are slowing it down a little more than I actually prefer. So I'm going to select all of my keyframes. And this is just a stylistic choice. You can do this either way. So I'm going to control click these back to normal keyframes because I actually don't want that to slow any of this portion down. But another thing I noticed when the frame blending is going on, this is kind of an extra tip here. You might see up here in the sky, and this is pretty common with aerial footage because of the blues, but I'm getting a little bit of color banding here. I don't know if you can see this with the compression of the tutorial, but you can see kind of lines coming across here, and that's because of the subtle blue color change from the top to the bottom. There's a couple things we can do to get rid of this, even if you have this problem on other instances of your aerial footage. Over here on the bits per channel in After Effects, you can click that, and we're currently working in 8 bits per channel. You can change this to 16 and click OK. And that'll probably help a little bit, but in our case, I still see the color banding going on. So what I want to do is I want to right click here and create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to go to my effects window here. I'm going to add the effect noise. You can find it right here under noise and grain. I'm going to select noise. I'm going to put that on the adjustment layer. And basically what we want to do is add just a little bit of synthetic grain to our image. It's going to help break up that color banding. So under the amount of noise here, I'm going to type this about 4%. I typically put this anywhere from 2 to 4%. I may increase this a little bit more because I know it's going to be hard for you guys to see this with the compression of the video. But that's going to help break up that color banding there. And you can choose to use color noise or to use regular black and white noise. But basically, it's just going to add kind of a little bit of a film grain to your footage, and it will help break up that color banding that's going on. I actually prefer to use the color noise. It tends to work even better to break up the banding. I may bump this up to 8% though, so you guys can see this on the video a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and do one more RAM preview of this so we can see what this looks like. And there we go. It's looking a lot better. This is just a phenomenal effect for aerial footage. Really help your shots to stand out. And if you want to render this out, what you can do is set your work area here to the length of your speed ramp. So mine ends about right there. So I want to have my work area end right there on that last keyframe. Then we can go back up to our project panel here. I'm going to go to the render queue. And if you don't see the render queue, you can go to window and select render queue right there. So I'll just grab my composition here. In my case, it's called example clip 5. I'll drag that down to the render queue. From here, I can adjust my settings for different things I want. If I want to do a QuickTime video, I can go to custom, QuickTime, choose my codec, click OK. Then you can output it right there and just hit render. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to do a faux slow motion effect on our footage, which is basically just a fake slow motion effect for footage that's shot at normal 24 or 30 frames per second that we want to try to slow down just a little bit in post. All right, in this lesson, we're going to learn how to do a faux slow motion effect on our footage, basically a fake slow motion effect where we're taking footage that's been shot at 30 frames per second. We're going to slow it down so it looks like it was shot at 60 frames per second. All right, so the first thing I want to do is create a new composition. So I'm going to grab my example clip and drag that down to the create a new composition window. And now we can see what we've got here. I've got this shot basically revealing the tree line here, flying really close in front of a tree, flies up, and now we see the tree line. This shot's about 2 seconds long. Let's say I had a project and I need this shot to actually fill in about 4 seconds. What we can do is a fake slow motion effect that's going to look pretty good for this shot. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is extend my composition. Right now it's currently only 2 seconds long. So I'm going to right click here, go to composition settings. For duration, I want to set this at 4 seconds. I'm going to click OK. I'll pull this back here so we can see. So now we can see our shot only fills up half of our composition timeline. And that's exactly what we want. So what we do now is we're going to click on our example clip. I'm going to right click on it. Under time, I'm going to go to time stretch. That's going to open up our time stretch options. And right now we can see the stretch factor is at 100%. So right now our duration is 2 seconds. And that's what our clip originally was. So I want this to be double. I'm going to want the stretch factor to be 200%. So I'm going to type in 200. And Now we can see our new duration is 4 seconds long, which is going to fill up our composition perfectly, and it's going to work for our shot that we need. So I'm going to click OK. And now we can see our shot's been stretched to 4 seconds. Which that looks pretty good, but let's go ahead and RAM preview this and we can see what's happening here. Alright, so now we can see what's going on here. Basically, every frame has been duplicated from our 2-second shot, which is what enables it to become a 4-second clip, which that can work pretty good, and it's a very quick effect that'll work good in a pinch. However, we're getting kind of a strobing effect because each frame is just being duplicated, so it's kind of jumping a little bit. And that doesn't look very cinematic, and we want this to look really good. So what we can do is go over to frame blending. We can click it once, and that's going to enable frame blending for this clip, so we can go ahead and turn it on for a composition here. We're going to see something very strange, because what frame blending is doing, that's taking each frame and kind of overlaying the one before and after over each other. So if I do a RAM preview of this, it's going to look very trippy, almost like a dreamlike sequence. Now we can see what this is doing. It does slow it down, but it just doesn't look quite right to the eye. Again, it looks kind of like a dream sequence. So we need to take this a step further. So if we go over to our frame blending here, we can click that one more time, and that's going to enable what's called pixel motion. And this is an awesome effect when you're wanting to create a faux slow motion effect. So what it's doing is taking one frame and the very next frame, and it's creating a new frame in between them from the data from each of those outside lying frames. So we can go ahead and RAM preview this and you can see what's happening. Now one thing to note when you're doing the pixel motion, it's going to take a little bit longer to render because it's creating all those new frames in between, but it's going to make the shot look a lot smoother and look a lot more like a real natural slow motion shot. And there we go. Now we can see that this is not stuttering at all. It looks much more like a regular slow motion shot. And this has all been created from a 30-second shot that's now being interpreted like it was almost shot at 60 frames per second. So this is a really cool, quick, and easy way to get slow motion effects added to shots that weren't shot at a higher frame rate. Now one thing to note, since it is creating these new frames and you have shots like this that have just a lot of stuff going on, you may notice a little bit of artifacting that can occur like in between the branches here. It may get a little bit fuzzy. In our case, I don't think anyone's going to notice just because when this is viewed, at 100%, no one's going to be able to see that going on, but it's just one thing to keep note of. And you may see some artifacting going on around the edges, so just keep that in mind and keep an eye out for that when you do this effect. But it's a really cool and convincing way to make a shot look like it was shot at a higher frame rate when it wasn't. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to add motion blur to our shots in post in order to prevent strobing. Alright, in this lesson we're going to learn how we can add some motion blur to our shot in post in order to prevent strobing effects on our footage. I'm going to be working with example clip number 7. So I'm going to drag this clip down here to create a new composition. Alright, I'm going to start out doing a RAM preview of this shot. We can see what's going on here. We have this drone flying close over the treetops here, basically to reveal the terrain. So I'm going to do a RAM preview. And there we go, it's looking very nice. But one thing you might notice here is it's common with drones to film, at a higher shutter speed. I think in this case I was filming it probably around 160th or 200th of a second. And it's not uncommon for a GoPro to film at 1/1000th of a second. So I'll zoom in here so you can see what's going on. So when it flies past these trees here, since they're flying very close to the footage, we almost get this kind of shuddery looking step right there of the footage. So you can see it's very tack sharp, there's no motion blur on it. So it's basically creating what's called a strobing effect there. So what we want to do is take that away, basically blur this a little bit so it's not distracting to the viewer. I'm going to do another RAM preview, zoomed in on this so you can see it a little bit closer up. And this is really easy to get rid of though in After Effects. So what we're going to need to do, I'm going to bring up the effects panel here under Window. And I'm going to add the effect Pixel Motion Blur. It's under the time effect there. I'm going to drag this effect onto the footage. And basically what this is going to do, you can already see it's started to add some motion blur to it. So I'm going to turn this off just for a second. I'm going to zoom in here. Basically on these branches here, anything that's closer to the camera moving at a faster rate of speed is going to be affected by this. So what it's doing, it's basically looking at each frame and it's going to determine which pixels are moving the most. And in our case, it's going to be the trees here because they're really close to the camera. And it's going to add basically synthetic motion blur to these areas of the shot. And it's very effective. So I'm going to pull back here onto the trees here. And I'm going to check the effect on and off here for pixel motion blur. And you can see what it's done here. It's added this awesome looking motion blur right there just on the trees. It's not affecting anything in the background. It's not moving. And we can scroll through here and kind of see what's happening. Now this is kind of a render heavy effect, so we'll take a little bit extra time to render this. But you can also fine tune and adjust some of the settings. So if you don't want the blur to be as long, you can adjust your shutter angle here. So you can set it at 100. You see that's going to shorten up the blur a little bit there. I typically leave it at just 180, what it is normally. I feel like that looks the most natural. And what I typically do is increase the shutter samples here. So this is how many instances it's creating right here of the motion blur. So if I zoom in here, we can see kind of some of the shutter samples here. So we got about 5 of these little lines here. So I usually increase this to about at least 8. You can see that helps to blur those away so we're not getting any stuttering with the motion blur. And for vector detail, I typically leave that around 20, but you can increase this if you're needing more detail in the blur, or you can decrease it. You may just adjust that because sometimes with this faux motion blur, you may get some weird squiggly artifacts. So you may want to play with the vector detail to fine tune those out. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at 20. And now I'm going to go ahead and do a RAM preview of this so we can kind of see the difference between without motion blur and with motion blur. So again, here's without. Very shuttery, very stroby. And here's with. This will take just a second to run through the RAM preview. I'll go ahead and speed this part up for the lesson. And there we go. We've created a very nice looking organic motion blur under our shot. We've taken away that strobing effect, so it's not going to distract the viewer. It was very easy to do in After Effects. In the next lesson, we're going to look at some different methods you can use to stabilize an aerial shot. In this lesson, we're going to look at some different ways you can stabilize an aerial shot. I'm going to be working with example clip 8 from the project files. So I'm going to click that clip and go ahead and drag that into a new composition. What we've got here is a 4K aerial clip of a boat going across a lake here. And if I scroll through this shot here, we can take a look. Basically what we can see is it's basically a panning shot of this boat going across the water. One thing I'll notice is the boat is on this side of the frame at the beginning, and then by the end, it's kind of like a pan too far for this, so it moves the boat over here to the other side. It's an okay shot, but what I'd really like is if the camera panned perfectly with the boat, so the boat stayed right in the center of the screen. We can also see we have a couple other problems here with the horizon being crooked and stuff like that, which we can fix a little bit later on. But let's start off by taking a look at how we can get this boat to stay in the center of our shot by stabilizing it here. I'm going to be using the tracker effects here, and if you don't see that window, you can go to Window and select Tracker, and I've brought that up and I've just placed it up here just so we can see it a lot easier in the tutorial. So I'm going to select my clip here in the composition, and I'm going to go over here to Stabilize Motion. And what this is going to do is open up the stabilizing options on our clip here, and we see they have this little track point box here, and you can click it and move it around. You want to be careful when you move this around not to select the arrow right in the very dead center, because you can see that's going to move that outside of our track box. And that's an option that we really don't need right now, so I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. So just make sure you select inside of this inner box here. And basically what we're looking for is, I'm right here at the very beginning of our clip, and I want to put the tracker point on something in the scene that I want to remain pretty stable. So in this case, for me, it's the boat. I want that to be basically stable in the shot the whole time. So I'm going to need to select a track point on the boat. And for me, I can drag the tracker over here. This inner box is going to be our main tracking point, so it's going to be the actual object that we want to track. And we can resize this box here as big or as small as we want it to be. And then you can see I can place it on top of the boat there. So it's basically just tracking the boat. And when you click on it, it's actually going to give you a magnified view of everything. So I can align this perfectly on the boat. Now this outer box here, this is going to be basically the track area. So from one frame to the next, this is where it's going to be looking so it knows where the tracking area is. So as long as our boat stays within this secondary box here from one frame to the next, then our track should be okay. We can actually probably make it smaller in this case because the boat's not moving very fast from one frame to the next. Or you can also increase it to be very big if you have an object that's moving really quickly through the scene. However, the bigger this tracking area box is, the longer the track is going to take because it has to analyze more pixels. Now in our case, I think we can get away with just tracking this black canopy on the top of our boat here, and I'll go over that a little bit later as to why that's going to be beneficial to us. But typically the smaller the track point that you can use and get away with, the faster and better your track's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and just make our track point be right on top of this black canopy here. And I'll move our track area to be just a little bit bigger than our track point. So now we can go ahead and look at some of the other options we can use with the Stabilize Motion effect. I'm going to click on the options here. And what this tracker is looking at initially right now is the luminance. So I've got this dark black canopy and the water back here is kind of this gold lighter color. So since I'm using a luminance track, this should be a pretty easy track. Again, that boat cover on the top is very dark. But you have some other tracking options you can use here too. Let's say this water was kind of a brighter blue and the canopy was a bright red. Well, red's obviously going to be a lot different than blue. So you might want to change that to a saturation when you do your track. And you also have the option of doing an RGB track. But typically I just leave this on luminance. Since most of the things that I track in my stabilization shots are usually small points and they're usually dark and pretty contrasty. All these other options I typically leave the same as they are on default. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You have some other options in the tracker here that you might want to use, such as rotation of your shot and scale, but typically for most of my aerial tracks, I just leave this on a position track. I tend to get the best results when I use just position only. All right, so now we go ahead and attempt to track our shot. I'm gonna go ahead and click the play button here to analyze forward. And now we can see that's tracking pretty quickly, and you can see the track point there is staying right there on top of the boat. It's actually gonna go out of frame here, so I'm gonna hit stop just so we can look at something real quick. I'm just gonna pull out my zoom there. All right, now we can see this is tracked along this. I'm gonna pull this back. Let's say your track messes up and it starts tracking, let's say one of these darker waves back here. It thinks that that's actually the boat canopy. What you can do is just move a little bit further back in your track to where it was back on the correct position. In our case, again, here it's the boat canopy. And what you can do is you can basically correct this frame by frame if you need to. You can click this secondary button over here, which is analyze one frame at a time. So I can click that and you can see it's just gonna analyze forward one frame. You can see that corrects itself, and if it messes up, you can manually actually move that to where it needs to be and then click forward again. I'm gonna go ahead and click analyze forward to let this finish all the way through. So it'll take just a second. All right, now that that's finished and this looks pretty good, I can just scroll through here and see if that stays on the top of the boat the whole time. That's exactly what I want. So I'm gonna go ahead and click apply. And we can apply this to the X and the Y dimensions, or just the X or the Y only. Typically I do both X and Y, but in some cases you may just wanna do the X or just the Y position. But in our case, we're gonna do X and Y for this shot. I'm gonna click OK. And now we can see what this has done here. It's basically made keyframes for the position of this shot for each frame. So if I scroll through here, we can see the boat now is staying perfectly stable basically in our shot. Now we see this black area over here because that's where it's repositioning the actual shot, but we can see the boat is perfectly stable. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the title action safe here so I can see where the perfectly center of the shot is. Now I'm gonna click the clip and just move the boat so it's right there in the center of the shot. So if I scroll through here, the boat should stay right in the center, which it does. That's exactly what we want. And now, since our clip again is 4K, and we're typically just gonna be outputting in a 1080p composition, we can go ahead and resize our composition down to 1080p, and this will get rid of these black bars around the edges here. So I'm gonna right click here, go to composition settings. I'm just gonna type in 1920 by 1080. I'll click OK. And now we can see we don't have the black bars anymore. I'm gonna turn off this title action safe. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do a RAM preview of this just so we can see what this looks like. And now you can see that we've done a really good job stabilizing our shot, made it a lot more usable. And again, since we're using a 4K clip, we can crop in and we're not losing very much quality. And we can actually probably crop in a little bit more on this clip. I'm gonna click on the clip and hit S for scale. I'm gonna scale this down a little bit more. Just scroll through here to make sure I'm not getting any black bars. I'm not. So you can see what a benefit this is to actually use a 4K clip, because we have that much more extra room. We can just move in on the shot, reposition it, rescale it, however we need. And again, we can stabilize this shot, which now makes this shot that was a decent shot to begin with, but now is a much more usable shot. There's one more thing we need to tweak here. Our horizon line is crooked here. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna select the rotation tool here. I'm just gonna rotate this a little bit so that's even. That looks pretty good right there. Scroll through here just make sure I'm not getting any black bars and nothing's getting cut off. All right, that's looking really good, and that's one way you can stabilize your aerial clips using the stabilized motion option and the tracker options there. Now let's go ahead and look at another way you can stabilize your shots, and that's using the warp stabilizer. I've got another clip here I'm gonna look at. So this is a shot taken with some GoPro footage on some very rough terrain here, and we can see we're getting a lot of shaking and some Jello effects that are happening on this shot, and this shot is actually moving forward through the scene. Now, in some cases, you will be able to use the stabilized motion for a shot like this if you have something very prominent, basically in the center forward part of your screen that you can track. But in our case, we just kind of have these brown trees here. Nothing really particularly stands out. And a lot of times with shots that are moving through a scene, I like to use the warp stabilizer. And again, with this shot, since we have Jello effects, warp stabilizer is going to by far be the best option for us. So I'm going to select the clip here, and I'm going to go ahead and select warp stabilizer. And by default, it's going to start analyzing right off the bat. I'm going to click cancel just so we can look at a couple options here. We're going to want the result to be smooth motion. I'm going to leave the smoothness at 50%. And in our case, since we have Jello, I'm going to go ahead and leave this on subspace warp. If you don't have Jello, you just have kind of some shaking going on, you can probably get away with setting this on position only. But again, I'm going to leave this on subspace warp. I'm going to go ahead and click analyze. I'm going to let this analyze, and I'll speed through this part for the tutorial. All right, now the analysis is done. You can see this made a pretty significant difference on our shot. We're still getting a little bit of shaking around the edges of the shot, and that's going to be common with the warp stabilizer effect, but you can see the center of the shot here is pretty stable. Looks a lot better. It's gotten rid of a lot of those Jello effects, but we can refine this even more if we want to. We have some other options here. If you want to preserve the scale of your shot where it doesn't actually crop in on anything, go ahead and check that. And you can see we're getting a little bit wider angle of view of our shot here, back to the way it kind of looked when it was initially shot. And if you want to increase the smoothness a lot, you can up this all the way to 100%. That's going to just stabilize that. Go ahead and do a RAM preview of this. And that's looking 10 times better than the shot did initially. We can go ahead and do a RAM preview of what it looked like before we did the warp stabilizer effect here, just so we can have a reference. You see how much micro shaking is going on, Jello. It's kind of getting off kilter with the rotation. So this is doing a really good job at stabilizing that. And you can actually increase the smoothness even more than 100%. I'm actually going to turn the scale off there so it can crop in a little bit more. Because the more it can crop in, the smoother it's going to be. I'm going to set this to 500%. We'll just go ahead and see what this looks like. Now we can see what this looks like at 500% smoothness. It has cropped in on the shot significantly. We're getting kind of a Zolly effect going on here in the center. You can see the center of the shot kind of almost looks like it's pulling away from the camera. That's just a side effect of the warp stabilizer because of the way it's stabilizing the shot. But it still looks pretty cool and looks a lot better than it did before. And you can go through here and just play with these options if you need to with your shots. You can check down the advanced tab here and do a detailed analysis if you want even more of an analysis for better stabilization on your shot, and that's going to take a lot longer and it's going to increase the render time a lot. In this case here, I'm not going to use that, but it's just a good option you can have if you need to try to refine your shot even more. All right, those are my 2 recommendations for stabilizing your aerial footage. If one method doesn't work, the other one usually will. So definitely experiment with some of these with your aerial shots. I use them all the time to help kind of stabilize and refine little things in my shots. It really increases the production value of them. And this can definitely help take an average shot to the next level. In the next lesson, we're going to look at how we can add a faux zoom to a shot in post, which is basically a fake zoom. It's going to help add more dimension to our shots. And it's a cool trick that I use a lot in my aerial videos. In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can add a zoom in post to our aerial footage. This is one of these effects that's really easy to do that a lot of people just don't think to do. And it can really add another dimension to your aerial shots. I'm going to be using example clip 9 from the project files. This is a 4K clip, but I'm going to go ahead and create a 1080p composition first just to get started. So I'm going to click down here to create a new composition. I'm just going to call this Zoom. And it's a 1920 by 1080 composition. Frame rate is 23.976, about 5 seconds long or so. I'll click OK. All right, I'm going to drag my 4K clip now into my composition. All right, the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to click on my clip, and I'm going to go to Layer, Transform, Fit to Comp Height. That's going to resize our footage there for the composition. So if I click on the clip here and I hit S, we can see that our scale is right now at 50%. So what we have is an aerial shot of the drone following this old-fashioned truck that's going down this dirt road. I'm going to adjust the resolution here to half just so we can see this a little easier. This is a pretty cool shot because, again, the drone's tracking with the truck. But I think it would be even cooler if the drone was actually zooming in onto the truck, so basically drawing more attention to the truck. And this is basically going to look like we have a zoom lens on our drone that can then zoom into the truck, which obviously we don't have that. But what we do have is 4K footage in a 1080p composition. So in essence, we can scale this footage up and not lose any quality. And in doing so, it's going to give the impression that we're actually zooming in on the footage, and it has a really eye-pleasing effect. So let's go ahead and look at how we can do this. Now you can start at any point in the footage with this effect. I typically like to just start at the very beginning of the clip and kind of gradually zoom in over time. But where our zoom is going to occur is right here on the anchor point of the footage. So you can see that's basically dead center of our shot here, and that's fine, I think, for this shot. There are some cases where you don't want it to actually zoom in there, so I'll just demonstrate this for you. I'll hit S on the keyboard, again for scale. I'm just going to pull this up, and you can see where we're zooming in right there, right in the center of that clip, where the anchor point is. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. If you ever need to move that, though, you can click up here to the Pan Behind tool, and then you can actually click on that anchor point, and you can move it to different places. So I can move it right here onto the truck, which the truck is going to move throughout this clip, so it won't stay right there, but just to demonstrate this will work. So I'm going to pull the scale up now, and you can see it's zooming in right on the truck. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. So if you ever need to move that around, if you want to control where it zooms into, just move around the anchor point. So I'm going to set it about right there in front of the truck because it looks like the truck kind of moves up into that spot. So by the end of the clip, that's going to be a good place to be zoomed into. All right, so this is a pretty straightforward effect. So I'm just going to make a keyframe here on the scale, right at 50% at the beginning of the clip, and I'll just drag down here to the end. I'm just going to type in 100% here and see what this looks like. That looks pretty good. So that's quite a bit more zoomed in on our shot. We're not losing any quality because, again, we're just now at 100%. Because we have this 4K clip. So now I'm going to go ahead and do a RAM preview on this so we can see what this looks like. And there we go. You can see this adds a much more eye-pleasing movement to the shot. It's very subtle, but very effective. Now, if you want to take this effect a little bit further, what you can do is add motion blur to this shot, because since we're scaling up the footage, there would actually be a little bit more motion blur onto the shot. In reality, it's not going to be a lot, it's going to be very subtle, but you can go ahead and do this too. I'm going to click toggle the switches down here so I can bring up the motion blur. And I'll just check on motion blur right here for the clip, and I'll check it on for the comp so we can preview it here. So I'll go ahead and preview that. It won't be very noticeable, but in some cases it will add a difference there. So let's go ahead and ramp preview this. It's a very minor difference there, and a lot of times it'll depend on how quick your zoom is actually taking place. If the motion blur is going to show up that much, I'll demonstrate this here. I'm just going to pull this zoom keyframe really quick so you can see kind of what's happening. I'm going to click on this last keyframe here and hit F9 on the keyboard to make that an easy ease keyframe so it kind of eases into it a little bit more. You can already see with the motion blur on, since we're doing a very quick zoom, it's adding that motion blur to the edges there. So we'll just ramp preview this. It's going to look almost like a spy movie, I guess, like it's tracking the truck here, but we'll take a look at this. And there you can see it's very quick zoom in, but we have the motion blur there, so that's a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And that's how you add a faux zoom to your aerial footage in post. Again, it's a very simple and easy effect, but it is quite effective. In the next lesson, we're going to examine some various color grading methods for aerial video and how we can apply them to our aerial footage to make it look more cinematic. In this lesson, we're going to look at some various methods you can go about color grading your aerial footage in After Effects. Now, when you color grade your footage, this is basically going to be up to your own discretion, because I'm assuming you're going to have a look in mind for your particular short film or your aerial video. So a lot of this is going to be up to your creativity for you to experiment with and find a look that suits your shot. I'm going to go over lots of different ways you can go about getting your look, whether that's through free effects in After Effects or some other paid plugin effects that you can purchase and use with After Effects. There's quite a few different methods I'm going to go over here, so I'm sure some of those are going to be suitable for the look you're wanting. I'm going to be working with some of the example clips from the project files. You can work with any clips that you want to. I'm going to start off the clip that we use in the color correction lesson. If I actually click on the clip here, you can still see some of the effects that we applied from our initial color correction. Now, when it comes to color grading, you can apply your effects directly to your already color corrected footage. Just put them below them right there. But what I like to do is actually add a new adjustment layer. I'm going to right click here and click new adjustment layer. And I'll click on it, hit enter, and I'm just going to call this color grade. And I actually like to apply my effects to this adjustment layer instead of directly on my footage. That way I can toggle this adjustment layer on and off and see the changes that I've made to my footage throughout the color grading process. Now I'm going to go over to the Effects and Presets panel here. If you don't see this, you can go to Window and click Effects and Presets. And you'll see here we have lots of different options here in After Effects, but we have this color correction area here. If I toggle this down, you can see all these different color effects that we have access to natively in After Effects. So you're going to have lots of different options you can go about to apply your color grading. One of my favorites that I like to use and my go-to with color grading is the curves effect. So I'm going to select the curves effect and just drag this onto my color grade adjustment layer. And again, this is going to be up to your own creativity, but you can use the curves effect for a variety of different things. You can apply contrast to your shot like we did with our initial levels effect. I'm going to reset this because I actually don't want to do any contrast adjustments. I want to do some color channel adjustments. So if you check this right here under channel, you have access to all the different RGB channels here. So I can select the blue channel. If I want to pull some blues up into this shot, maybe make the shot look a little bit cooler. Or if I just want the blues to be in the shadow, I can click again so that those are only into the shadow area. Now you can see we have a very cool stylistic look here. Almost kind of a cold indie look on this footage. And we can scroll through here and see kind of how this looks. Very cool. We can go to the red channel here if I wanted to add some reds into the highlights up here. So now we're kind of getting a little bit of a cinema look here. We have this kind of warmer tones up here in the lighter colors and a darker blue. So that's just one way we could go about it with the curves effect. I'm going to reset that again. I'm actually going to go to the green channel here. I'm going to pull up the greens. I'll go to the blue, maybe pull the blues back a little bit. And we can add kind of a storm look. This is a common color grade that you might see before like a tornado or something's about to strike if you want to make this storm look a lot more menacing. So you can see in relatively few clicks that we've got a very cool stylistic look using the curves effect. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete the curves effect and show you another effect I like in After Effects, and that is the photo filter effect here, which is also under the color correction effects. So I'm just going to drag this over to my adjustment layer. And what photo filter is basically like adding a filter onto the front of your camera. You have access to all these warm and cool filters and some other custom color filters here. And I'm going to increase the density on this all the way up to 100% so we can see the full effect of this. And you can check on or off the preserve luminosity. I typically leave it on. I think it looks a little bit better. We have the whites kind of popping out here. But we can scroll through these filters here and look at the different colors we have. We can add a cooling filter if we want it to be a little bit of a cooler shot. Or we can just add some of these custom color filters here, such as a red, maybe a violet. And again, you can control the density of these. So if you just want to add them in, maybe at a mixture of around 70 or 50% there, all of these look really good. And you can also go down here to a custom color. And when you select that, you can custom select the color you want the filter to be. So you have a lot of options here with this effect. So that's the photo filter effect there. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go over to the effects and presets. I'm going to type in gradient here. I'm going to add the effect gradient ramp to our adjustment layer. What this is going to do is add a gradient ramp of two different colors here. So what I want to do is emulate a gradiated filter that would be on the front of our camera. And that is where I want to apply colors just to the top portion of our shot, basically fading down into nothing. So I turn this off here on the visibility of the adjustment layer. Let's say our sky is really blown out up here, and I want to add just a little bit of blue color to this, but not affect this grass or trees down here. This is really easy to do, so I'm going to turn back on the visibility of the adjustment layer. I want to leave this bottom color white because that's basically going to be nothing, but this top color, I want to select basically a blue tone here. Maybe a cyan color there. And for the channel of our adjustment layer under mode here, if you don't see that, you can toggle the switches here until you do. I'm going to set this to multiply. Now we can start to see what's happening here. And we can adjust the height of the ramp here by adjusting these values of the start of the ramp and the end of the ramp. So I can pull this up here so that we're kind of getting just a little bit of blue at the top portion of this here. Again, this can really help if your sky is blown out and you want to add a little bit of blue tone to your shot. I do this quite a bit, so we can scroll through here and see what this looks like. And if you want to adjust the overall power of this gradient ramp, you can select your color grade layer and hit T on the keyboard for opacity, and you can just lower the opacity of this. I would do something like 50% on this particular shot. And that's a quick and easy way you can apply a gradiated filter to your shot. I'm going to go ahead and delete the gradient ramp. I'm going to set the opacity back to 100 and put this back on normal. Now I want to show you a cool third-party plugin by Red Giant, which is called Colorista. This is a paid plugin that you actually have to purchase from Red Giant that works in conjunction with After Effects. The plugin runs for about $200, but it adds quite a few quick and easy features that you'll find very handy if you do decide to purchase the plugin. So I'm going to go to Effect, Magic Bullet, Colorista 3. And I'll just pull this out here so we can see everything going on here. The first thing we have is a three-way color corrector. So you can kind of do adjustments like we did with the curves effect here. So I'm going to zoom in here just so we can see what's going on. So I can add blues into the shadows or just adjust the overall contrast of the shadows. Do lots of fine-tuning color adjustments here. Right in this one effect. That's what's convenient about this. Everything's just in one panel. I want to reset this here and show you another cool feature. And that is the auto balance feature. So I can select this color picker here and then select a area of my shot that's supposed to be white. So up here in this cloud should work great. I'll click. You can see that did some quick and easy auto adjustments to our shot. And it looks really good here. It might have added a little bit too much contrast, so I can always adjust that over here in the shadow section. But you can see if I check this on and off here for the effect, it did a really good color balance there. There's a little bit of red toning on the initial shot up here in the clouds, and that's pretty common with DJI footage. So if I turn the effect back on, you can see it's corrected for that. It has lots of other cool effects here, such as the pop, which is basically kind of a sharpening and contrasting of the shot there. You can see how that really made the features of the shot pop out. So you can see what a nice color grade we've added to our shot in just a few quick clicks here using the Colorista plugin. I'm going to go ahead and delete this and show you some other options here. Something else that's very popular in color grading is using what's called lookup tables or LUTs. And these are basically universal color presets that you can use on your footage that work in After Effects, Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, anything that can use a lookup table. I've actually included 3 custom lookup tables that I created with the project files that you can use on this footage and your own footage just to get you started using lookup tables for your color grading. I'm going to go over to another example here and show you kind of how this works. So in order to apply a lookup table to our footage in After Effects, we need to come over here to the effects panel and type in LUT. And you'll see the effect here, Apply Color Lookup Table. Before we apply that though, I'm going to right click here and add a new adjustment layer. I like to apply my LUTs to adjustment layers, and I'll show you why, but mainly so I can just adjust the overall power of the effect using the opacity slider. So I'm going to name this LUT for our lookup table layer. And I'm going to apply the color lookup table to the LUT adjustment layer. And that's going to immediately pop up a window on your computer for you to locate where your lookup tables are located. I've already located mine here. And these are the three that are included with the project files: rich greens, sunrise, and vintage blue. I'm going to click sunrise, so I'm going to select that and click open. And now you can see what this has done. The sunrise lookup table basically makes your shot look as if it was shot at sunrise or sunset. You can see it adds some cool golden tones, a little bit of red here in the shadows, and we can scroll through here. Adds a cool look to the shot, and we can check this on and off just to see what that looks like. But there are lots of different lookup table options out there, so you can find different ones and get different effects on your footage. Again, this one is meant to emulate sunrise, so I'm going to select my adjustment layer here and hit T for opacity. And let's say I want to adjust the density of this, so I could bring this down to around 50%. And you can just use these to fine-tune your shots, and you can actually color grade your shot and then apply a lookup table to them or vice versa, just to add a little bit more to your color grade. I'm going to bring the opacity back up to 100% here. Let's go ahead and check out a couple other of the lookup tables that are included with the project file. So if you want to change it out, you can just click Choose LUT up here. Now I'm going to choose the Rich Greens lookup table. And now you can see what this has done. It really pops out the greens. Almost makes them a little bit nuclear green, as I would call it, but it's definitely a stylistic choice if you want to use this rich of greens on your shot. We can check this on and off to see the difference there. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and check out the last one here. The final one is called Vintage Blue. And this adds a nice kind of faded cyan look to our footage, almost like vintage film looking there. So you can definitely experiment with these lookup tables and create your own custom looks. Finally, something that's got really popular in the last couple of years for digital footage is what's called film emulation. And there are a couple different film emulation plugins for After Effects that will make your digital footage look like it was actually shot on film. And the first one of those is called Film Convert. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that now. I'm going to go to Effect, Film Emulation, Film Convert. Again, this is a third-party plugin for After Effects. It runs about $200. But what's cool about this is you can go here and select your different camera settings. So in this case, I can select DJI and Inspire 1. And then click Apply, which will automatically cause the plugin to do some adjustments here so I get accurate film representations of these different film emulations here. So I can scroll down here and scroll through some of these. And you can see this adds just a very cool aesthetic to the image. Even adding some accurate film grain to the shot so it even matches the film look even more. I can go ahead and check this effect on and off here so you can see how drastic of a change it's actually doing to the footage. I really enjoy using Film Convert for color grading. I use it quite often. There's another film emulator you may want to check out too, though, which is called Koji Advance. So I'll go to Effect here, Koji Color, Koji Advance. This is another film emulation plugin. It also runs around $200, and you can select your different film stocks here. In this case, I'm going to select Canon DSLR because this matches the Inspire 1 pretty closely. And you can select a different film stock here. And you can see this adds a very nice film aesthetic to the footage as well. In the next lesson, we're going to learn how to do some basic 3D camera tracking to our aerial footage. We'll also look at how to add in some basic 3D text and a logo to make it appear as if it's actually in the scene. In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can do some basic 3D camera tracking on our aerial footage. I'm going to be using example clip number 7 for this lesson from the project files. I'm going to drag that clip down here and create a new composition. All right, in this shot, we can see the drone flies forward over these trees, basically revealing the terrain. But let's say we wanted to add in some text basically on here, maybe something that just an intro text or a title, and we want the text to actually be in the 3D space so that the drone actually flies past the text. Well, this is a really cool effect, and it's really easy to do in After Effects here. So I'm going to go up here to Window, and I'm going to select Tracker, so I can see the tracker options here. And I'm going to select my clip, and then I'm going to select Track Camera. This is going to start analyzing the footage. This may take a minute or two here to analyze all the frames. I'm going to speed this part up for the tutorial. What this is doing is looking at different track points throughout the clip, analyzing frame by frame, and it's going to solve for a 3D camera here. All right, now that that's finished, when we have the effect selected up here, we can scroll through here and you can see these little colorful track points all throughout the clip, and you can see that they basically stick to where they are in the scene, which is pretty cool. And we have, a ton of them out here. Probably can't even see all of them because they get really tiny out here farther in the distance. But this looks as if we have a pretty good 3D track here. So what we need to click now is Create Camera. And that's going to create a 3D camera here above our footage. And I'll hit U here to reveal all the keyframes. So what we have here is a camera that is keyframed to be in the same 3D space as our scene here. But right now we really can't tell what's going on. So what we need to do is add in some text. So I'm going to go up here and click on the text tool. And that should open up these text options here, and I'll go ahead and click here on the scene, and I'm just going to type in some text here. I'll type in hello. All right, so after we have that created, this really isn't going to do anything yet. It's still a 2D layer, so we need to go down here on our 3D text. And if you don't see the 3D switch, you can go ahead and click the toggle switches here, and we can check this to be 3D. And right off the bat, you'll notice that the text got a lot smaller and basically moved a lot further back into the scene. And that's a result of the 3D camera track here. So if we scroll through here, you'll see that we actually fly up to the 3D text and actually fly through it. So now our text is actually tracked into the scene. But the text is obviously a lot smaller now than it was initially. And this will happen when you convert layers into 3D layers for a 3D scene. They basically need to be rescaled. So there's two ways we can do this. We can select the text and hit S on the keyboard and actually just scale it up. Or we can go over here to the text and just increase the text size here. So whichever is easier for you. So I'm going to set this at around 900. And now we can also reposition our text with these position gizmos here. I can move it down on the Y-axis, the X-axis, or I can move it actually in Z-space on the Z-axis here. So I actually pull a little bit closer to us. And you can also click on the text here and hit P on the keyboard and adjust all these position points with the position here, so I can adjust the Z-axis here. So let's go ahead and move forward here so we can get some perspective on this shot. So we're actually flying forward and flying past the text. I actually think it would be pretty cool if we fly right in between these two L's here. So I'm going to move this over just a little bit and just kind of trial and error this until I get it just right. There we go. So that's a really cool way you can add some 3D text into a scene. You can maybe add an intro here, a title, whatever you want. And definitely feel free to explore the depth of the scene. I'm going to select the text here. I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate to create another copy of the text. And I'm going to move that further back in Z space there. So if we move forward here, we can see what's happening. And I'm going to change what this text says. And I'm going to change the color of the text here just so it looks a little different. Can move it around, push it further back in space. You can hold the shift when you're moving this around, that'll move it even further. Now we can scroll through the scene here just to check out the depth of everything here. So you can see how this adds a really cool dimension to our animation and can really add some cool production value to a shot. If you're wanting to track any information such as a location name, anything of that nature. I'm going to do a quick RAM preview of this so we can see what this looks like in real time. Now we can see the text has been seamlessly tracked into our scene. Didn't take very long at all. There's a couple other things we can do though to refine this to make it look even better. The first thing is turning on motion blur for our text. If you notice, it gets a little bit shuddery here when we get real close to the text. It doesn't have the natural kind of blur. So we can add some motion blur to this to make it blend with the scene in a little bit more organic manner. Just come over here to our text and just check on motion blur for each one of those. And then turn on motion blur for a composition so we can preview it. You can see what that did here. It added some blur as we speed past the text here. So I'll go ahead and check that on and off just so you can see that again. And again, feel free to play with the scale of objects. I'm going to select this text that's back here, and I'm just going to hit S on the keyboard for scale. I'm going to scale it up really big. I might even adjust how this text looks here real quick. Another thing you can do is you can actually select the rotation tool here and you can actually rotate the text in 3D space as well. I'm going to go ahead and leave this looking at the camera straight on there. You can see it kind of breaks the illusion here a little bit if you have some text that's too far back in the scene. There's something supposed to be in front of it. So you see these tree branches here in reality would be in front of that text that's really far back there in the scene, but I can actually kind of break the illusion if I move this in front of them there. So as you're looking at that there, you can tell something is not right. So if you have this instance, you would either have to mask out that text, or in my case, I'm just going to bring it above that there. So the illusion's not being broken by those branches that are in front of it. So that looks a lot better. Very cool. And that's how easy it is to track in 3D text to your aerial scenes. If your scene is a lot longer in length, the track may take a little bit longer to actually do. And this type of effect works best on shots that are flying pretty straightforward or over terrain that has a lot of features where it can track them pretty easily. You won't want to do this on scenes that have a lot of rapid movement. But definitely experiment with it and you will get some quality results from it. If you want to add your own custom image, such as a custom logo, that's really easy to do as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete this text here. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring in here this example logo that I have. I'm just going to drag this into my composition. And you can see this is actually scaled up a little bit bigger than our footage. So I'm going to hit S on the logo here and scale this down. The first thing I'll need to do is make the logo a 3D layer, so I'll check on the 3D layer box. And you can see it got a lot smaller initially because, again, it's now been recalibrated for the 3D space. So we can scroll through here and see we fly past the logo. So what I would want to do in this case is I would want to scale that up quite a bit here. Just by hitting S on the keyboard, I'll scale it up. So basically what I want to have happen is the camera flies through this logo, so it'll be pretty cool. When we fly toward the logo, we really can't see the features behind it, so it's almost as if it reveals this cool landscape shot as we fly through it. And to sell this even more, I want to turn on motion blur for my logo, and I'll turn on motion blur for the composition. I'm going to go ahead and do a RAM preview of this so we can see what this looks like. All right, now we can go ahead and check this out as we fly through the logo and reveal the vast terrain behind it. It's a really neat effect and definitely adds a new dimension to your aerial footage. Make sure you check out the next lesson where we're going to wrap up with the conclusion of our course. I want to thank you again for checking out this course, and hopefully the things I covered will help you to create great looking aerial videos. Again, I encourage you to download the project files for this course. There are lots of goodies in there, including aerial clips to practice on, color grading LUTs, PDF guide sheets, and more. As a final tip, make sure you include some quality music to go along with the visuals of your aerial videos. Typically, I recommend just using instrumental tracks since they tend to be less distracting and can let the viewer focus more on the visuals while providing a nice atmosphere. I use a lot of tracks from the website Audio Jungle, and I'll provide some links for some of my favorite tracks to accompany with aerial footage. Again, I'm Charles Yeager for Tuts Plus. Feel free to contact me with any questions about this course, and I want to thank you for watching.